Good morning, everyone. I'm Leanne Beckwith, SWFLN's Continuing Education Coordinator, and I would like to welcome you all to today's webinar, Setting Up a Virtual Reality Lab, and today's presenter, Dr. Stephanie Rollins. Dr. Rollins is a research and writing specialist at the Air University Press at Maxwell Air Force Base. She is also an adjunct professor for the University of Alabama and teaches digital reference, collection development, and organization of information, among other courses. Stephanie serves on both regional and state library committees, and she has 23 years of experience in academic and special libraries. She holds a BA in English from Auburn University, a master's degree in library service, and a doctorate in public administration, both from the University of Alabama. Please help me welcome Dr. Stephanie Rollins and enjoy her webinar. Stephanie?
Thank you so much, Leanne. Good morning, everyone. How's everyone doing? I'm so excited today to talk to you about virtual and augmented reality and how to set up a possible lab and what that means. But before I do, I want to take a little bit of a time travel with you. So how many of you watched the original Star Trek? I'm just looking in the chat box to see if anybody, some, okay. Same with me. I think when I was watching it, it was in the rerun kind of series, so I wasn't quite that old. But I just want to paint the picture for you. For me growing up, some of the best nights watching television were when you could stay up late and watch Star Trek, right? And this was a big treat because it had all the kid action stuff, aliens, space travel, cool pieces of futuristic equipment like communicators, recorders, and transporters. And, you know, constant requests from Scotty from the crew to either beam them up or give them more power. Kind of what was lost on me because I wasn't so great at science was how much science was being thrown at you. You know, the space exploration, the physics, the biology, the chemistry, and how much of the futuristic equipment on the show would actually become reality. I mean, think about today's mobile phones, our CAT scans and MRIs, and then Star Trek: The Next Generation followed the same formula, and it had updated aliens, a new kind of Scotty person, and a new take on futuristic equipment with things such as the holodeck, right? And so the holodeck was a room in which objects were projected on as holograph images inside a room, and characters could immerse themselves in anything from fighting aliens in a battle simulator to having a picnic with colleagues on the bank of an English river. And it all sounded like science fiction until you find out the holodeck concept wasn't the idea of some creative writer dreaming of virtual reality, but instead the idea actually came to the show based on work done by Gene Dolgoff, who back in 1964 had set up a holography lab in New York. So after years of all this stuff being kind of conceptual, it's really come to the forefront of our attention, and it's important for libraries. The systems, the industry, the creativity is very important to look at for libraries. And some of the things and some of the possibilities and opportunities are that virtual reality allows us to connect without being in the same location as someone. It allows us to know. It can teach people. People can learn from it. It allows us to learn. You know, we can actually immerse ourselves in lifelike situations. For instance, UPS is now providing virtual reality driving tests. It also allows us to explore. You know, we can travel to distant places we may never have the ability to do. And it also allows us to play in things like gaming and storytelling and live events where you don't actually have to be there. So with the advent of popular games like Pokemon Go, how many of you guys did that? And there was, the arrival of consumer devices such as the Oculus Rift, augmented reality, and virtual reality. They've kind of started creeping into our everyday lives, right? So what do these terms mean? Are they interchangeable? What does a busy librarian or educator need to know about this stuff? And why are these technologies important in the context of libraries? And also, how can we leverage this technology within our institutions, our libraries, our communities? And what larger issues should we also look about when adopting AR/VR, such as providing equal access to all? And so setting up a virtual reality lab, to get to the point, is a way to test this, is a way to explore this, whatever you define as a lab and however you want to do this. So that's what we're going to talk about today, is what is a lab, how do you set one up, what should it look like. I have a lot of questions for you. We're just going to do a brief review of some of the terminology, virtual reality, augmented reality, some other technology terms. There's a ton of terms out there associated with this topic. Kind of cover a brief history of VR, just show you kind of where we came from and where we are today, so you kind of know about some of the technology. The hardware and software, I'm not going to go into super specifics. There's not a ton out there, but I'll talk a little bit about it. What it looks like today, how it's applied, and then what does it look like for libraries, and why does it matter? Why do we care? Why do we set up labs? And then also, what do I mean by lab? Because there's different definitions, and we'll talk a little bit about that. And then don't ever do this, but how do you eat an elephant? And that's just an expression of how do you take this overwhelming project and break it down and be able to make it manageable. And then we'll get to how to plan and implement a lab, talking a little bit about your mission, your why, what resources you might need. And then I've got 2 case studies, because I can ask you all kinds of questions about your resources and what you need and advise you, but unless you look at kind of what other libraries have done, and we'll talk about what SWFLN does. They've got some fantastic products in their Bits N Bytes to Borrow lab. And then we'll also talk about a project that I was involved in. I helped a team of people set up Air University Library's Innovation Lab. So 2 very different ways of setting up a lab. And then at the end, I've got some additional resources. We may not get to that, but everything is self-explanatory. It's got the links, a little bit of a description, and then an actual screenshot from some sites. If you're not familiar with virtual reality, or if you're looking for more information, you want to know the trends, the statistics, places you can get books and articles and different things like that for free, that's at the end. So that's a kind of a whirlwind trip of what we're going to go through quickly. So I want to go, excuse me, I want to go through some of the basic terms just to get everybody on the same page, and then get to talking to you about what you need for your lab, and then how it looks for 2 different types of labs that are currently established. So just to kind of set the stage with what the terminology is, because sometimes people interchange it, and it's not necessarily the case. So virtual reality is kind of a complete immersion. So think about putting on goggles where you can't actually see. You're completely immersed in the scenario that you're looking at on the screen within the goggles. So things like HTC Vive is one of the headsets, Oculus Rift, and then very, very inexpensive is Google Cardboard. And you're kind of transported to this real world and also imagined environment, which is a lot of fun. So you could be landing in the middle of a squawking penguin colony, or on the back of a dragon. Awesome scenarios. You could climb Kilimanjaro if you wanted to. Very, very lots of fun. Another term that people associate with this is called augmented reality. And what's great about this is if you've ever done Pokemon Go, it's more of an overlay, or if you've done Snapchat. So you can actually still see what you're doing, but you kind of have an overlay of the reality. So you can still see the real world, but you are also seeing the overlay in front of you. So it just depends on what you like. I kind of prefer the augmented reality because I can still see what I'm doing. When I'm in the headset, I'm completely cut off and I can focus, so there's pros and cons to each one. Some other terms, mixed reality. It combines elements of both AR and VR, and you can interact with real objects. So people at Honda and Toyota, they're looking at things like this where they have glasses and they can actually see all the tools on a screen and touch them right in front of them, kind of like this guy in this picture here. And HoloLens is one of the first kind of notable mixed ones that does that. So some other terms that are out there, immersive, just what it says, you're kind of completely immersed into the experience. And then digital reality is kind of an umbrella term which all of these terms fall under. So that's just very quickly some of the major terms. That, like I said, there are more that you can look at. People call it all different things. Just to set the stage too, in terms of why is this important, and I'll get to a little bit more about that for libraries later, but You know, uh, in for 2017, I'm sorry, by 2018, they predicted that 171 million people will be active virtual reality users. So think of that in terms of people looking for jobs, people wanting to create and be creative, and you know, people are interested, and you know, it just gives you a little bit of statistics about virtual reality. And it's expected to grow. You know, and libraries are in the business of encouraging people to pursue new careers and new avenues. And so this is where, you know, we need to think about the people that are coming to our libraries and the things that are in our communities that are going to help people. These devices can really help you develop things to help people. And I'll talk about a couple of industries where that's coming and is already available. So for instance, this just talks about the rate of the market. You know, by 2018, it could reach $7 billion, $30 billion by 2020, and revenue markets $150 billion by 2020. You know, there's 500 million VR headsets could be sold by 2025. So just imagine that. So it's going to be in our communities. People are using it. In fact, when Oculus Rift had their Kickstarter, they exceeded their 250,000 goal and ended up raising about 2.4 million. And Facebook bought it right away, right? And it says also, you know, just the simplest ones, like the Google Cardboard, which has a head mount, has been downloaded over 10 million times. So they also expect the virtual reality headset sales to double every year, likely reaching a peak around 2025. So, you know, in terms of libraries and helping people and helping them develop themselves, there's a lot of fields that are embracing virtual reality, healthcare, there's education, of course, retail, where you can try stuff on and change your hair color, when designing cars, and of course also the movie industry. And also, you know, our media with journalism, they've developed tons of virtual reality scenarios. So how did we get here? And I'm going to go through this quickly, and there are so many things you could do to put in the history of VR, so I'm just going to hit some of the high points that I thought were interesting. So in 1831 was kind of the first one, which was the stethoscope by Sir Charles Wheatstone. And so you kind of sat in this device, and it used mirrors and projected. So that was one of the first ones. So it's not a new invention, you know, as I talked about in the beginning with Star Trek, right? And then also, do you guys know what else A.R. Glass wrote? It's a book that you're probably familiar with. Has a lion and a Tin Man and a Yorkie and a girl in a blue and white check dress. Do you guys know the title of that book? But what he wrote about in 1901 was kind of this loose concept of augmented reality, where these people had these, like, yes, Wizard of Oz, you win the prize, Sarah. Kind of this loose concept of augmented reality, where these character had a set of electronic glasses, and you guys remember Google glasses, right? And called character marker that were used to map data onto people. So that's, you know, not necessarily very recent, right? But that's been around. Pretty exciting. In 1961, you kind of see, this reminds me of the old microfilm machine a little bit, but it was called a stereoscopic television. And then they also had what was called a sensorama, which had a chair that would vibrate, and you could smell things, and it was that was by Morton Heelig, and that was in the 60s. Then we kind of get to 1968, where the device, the Sword of Damocles, was invented by Ivan Sutherland of MIT, and it was a device that came out of the ceiling, so very heavy, not very mobile. But, you know, you can see as we're going along, we're kind of getting closer to some of the different types of VR. In 1975, they had the Video Place by Myron Kruger, where you could see and look at things in another room. And then 1992, this was by a project by Tom Caldwell and David Mizell from Boeing, and they actually had kind of an apparatus where they could map the schematics onto a plane and map that through high-tech eyewear and project that onto reusable boards so they can work on planes, which was really kind of cool. And then we kind of got into some augmented reality. You know, we in the late 90s. And that was kind of with the first smartphones and different things like that. We had some augmented reality games, Quake, which was from the University of South Australia. We had the Battlefield Augmented Reality System from Columbia University. In 2003, we kind of had the first precursor to the cell phone. We had some augmented reality in the BMW ad, Adobe Flash. In 2012, we had the Oculus Rift. In 2013, you guys probably remember the Google Glasses. Did anybody have a pair of those or try those out? And then in 2014, they came out with the Google Cardboard. And 2015 is the HoloLens. And then 2016, we had the huge influx of everybody kind of making it a little bit more mainstream with Pokemon Go. And then Facebook, of course, in 2017 had 360 videos. So that's a quick trip through the history of kind of augmented and virtual reality. So anybody have anything to add about that, or any devices that I didn't mention, please speak up and share with your fellow colleagues. So when you're looking at virtual reality or augmented reality hardware and software, it involves the senses, it involves the brain. You've got peripheral hardware. You've also got software that you need to keep in mind. So these are all things that kind of compose the world of virtual reality hardware and software. That's just kind of the total interaction. And depending on the company, it can be consumer-focused or enterprise-focused. So you've got software and content that you're looking at. You've got the endpoints, which are kind of the devices, and then you've got the infrastructure, which is more like the apps and things like that. So this is kind of the industry picture of all of that. Tons and tons of companies and software and hardware that is involved with this entire process. So a huge place for people to find jobs, to refine their skills, and it's going to be huge for our communities. So when you're looking at the different devices, it can start from simple like a cell phone, Google Cardboard, you've got the Oculus Rift, up to these super high-end devices that require more performance, more computers. You're not just having a standalone simple device. And so, there's a lot to think about when you're building a lab, because what level of hardware and software do you need? So some of the applications of VR and AR today, you typically think about, the Oculus and how you can play games and watch movies and different things like that. But there are definitely some very practical applications for VR and AR. For instance, this first one on the top right is an oxygen mask that also has kind of glasses in it. So people and pilots were having trouble flying airplanes when the cockpit would fill with smoke. So they can put on this oxygen mask and flip a switch, and they can actually see all the controls in front of them and land the plane. Also, you can do, bottom left, you can do remote workers. They can get information on different things. In this bottom right, you can see these are people who are architects working from a remote location, and they're actually looking at inside the building. And then also this top left one is from Volkswagen. They have a 370-acre plant, and so they developed this virtual reality technology to help people their employees navigate the plant. Top right is home repair. This is a home repair company called Porch, and they use virtual reality, and you can actually take pictures of things that you want to have happen and get a quote from repairmen, which is very exciting. So also, bottom left, Boeing is using virtual reality and augmented reality to project wires and things for all their different planes, because all their different planes have different schematics, and this is one way they can do that. Bottom left is a guy with a construction hard hat, and it's not your average hard hat. You can see he's got glasses on, and what they can do is they can project buildings, they can do maintenance, they can look at plumbing and electricity, very, very kind of practical applications. One of my favorites is this top left one. This is a 18-wheeler, and what they did is they developed this hologram, and so they actually build it's a big enough space, and they actually build this 18-wheeler based on the hologram. And then a little bit more practical and closer to home, this is a tool called AccuVein. And so if you've ever gone to have blood drawn, which is terrifying for me, it helps to eliminate errors when people are getting blood taken. So it's not just about gaming. It's not just about having tons of fun, which is great. It's also about practical things that are going to infiltrate our everyday life, and some of them already have. So a little bit about, well, what does this look like for libraries? What are libraries doing? And this is more of a higher education focus, but it just talks about some of the trends, for virtual reality in libraries. And of course, it's, marketing, social engagement, amusement, and there's a lot of reports and recommendations, but for libraries, it's pretty recent. I mean, both labs that I'm talking about have been set up within the last year, and a couple labs, a little bit earlier, but not too long ago. So from some of the reporting, it says that there's going to be an increased impact for this technology. It's important to the development of educational technology, and then it also says that we need to put it as part of our strategic planning, because this is a society trend, right? And we want to, as libraries, be in people's lives and have an impact on them. And so we need to think about that. And then finally, this one came out just recently. It's the 2019 report. And it talks about, of course, the university campuses that get started, but it doesn't just have to be that. It's also public libraries. So they have some examples here of places that have these libraries, and then once a decision's made, it's usually provided through the library or other space that's open to students. Some libraries, again, loan equipment, which is fantastic. In Miami, at Florida International University, they actually go a step farther, and they have a building-sized makerspace, and they provide a range of technologies, including the mixed reality, to the campus and local communities, which is fantastic. So I kind of alluded this a little bit as we've gone along, but why is it important to libraries? It's important to libraries because we are one of the places that people can go and have access to free materials, right? And so we're one of the first places. And so they have exposure to new technologies, no different than the e-book, no different than computers when they first came out, or iPads, or, gaming systems. We're some of the first places that people are able to go at no cost and have exposure to these ideas. And virtual reality is going to be huge for our communities, and we need to be there for our customers so they can have exposure to it, and maybe even they'll develop something that saves the world. You just never know, right? So if we want everybody to have a shot at participating in these roles, it's important that we help people see what's coming and what's available. And you don't have to spend a ton of money to do this. Also, in terms of immersive storytelling, it'll become more frequent for conveying information, especially as all of our media invests in these types of technologies. There's also a significant push to bring this to education. Also, collections and spaces, of course. It's also found its space into several sectors that we've already talked about, like healthcare, architecture, construction, retail, travel, and tourism. And also, like my grandson, he's going to grow up with this technology, right? So he's going to be really accustomed to expecting these kinds of things in his life, which is way different from when I grew up, and maybe when you grew up. It's an exciting time. But it's also, for people, it kind of levels the playing field, because people can now experience different places in the world, cultural events, in virtual reality. So it's kind of a more equitable way of providing content and access to places. And so we need to think about this and provide solutions, and think about it in our library's mission, but also think about in terms of cataloging and equitable access. Because what about somebody who's visually impaired? How are they going to use virtual reality? How is this going to work? And I don't have the answer to that. So what is a lab? Finally getting to the point, but I just wanted to set the stage and give you some terms and applicability of what VR can do if you ever have to make the case for your library, for your director, to have them help them see why it's important, even if you start small. So basically, a VR lab are established by individuals or academic institutions or organizations with specialized equipment for all people. They can explore the world of virtual reality to practice, and they can also create their own projects or productions. And this is just kind of my definition here. They can be huge fixed locations, right? You can have this huge space, this nice space that your library has a lot of money for. Or it can be a mobile lab, and I'm going to give you an example of both. So it can be light and agile, can be something that you check out, can be fantastic that way. The type of equipment can vary. You can also have a different uses for the labs. It can be more than just virtual reality. It can be a mixed media, like we talked about earlier. Mixed media has kind of a bunch of different things in it. And also your staffing level and the training can vary. Some places offer training, some places you're kind of on your own, different things. There's different kind of requirements. The bottom line is it's your community, it's your lab, and it must fit your needs and your community. So, please don't eat an elephant. Elephants are our friends. But how do you eat an elephant? And this is something I have to ask myself all the time because sometimes I get overwhelmed and I need to break things down and figure out how can I do this. So that you ask somebody, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. So some of the things we're going to look at, in terms of resources, in terms of budget and promotion and equipment and security, we're going to talk through those things. But the first thing you need to think about is, what is your mission? Why do you want to do this lab? Figure out if you even need to have one. What are the pros and cons? It could be something that's coming down from your top level organization, or you could be starting at the bottom and trying to convince your organization. But why do you want to do this? Think about how you're going to do it. Who are we doing it for? And then what value are you bringing? So you need to kind of define your why before you can begin with the what and the how. So this is just something I made up. It's not very eloquent. I feel like I need to revise it. But think about just kind of what you're trying to do. So for me, I just made this up. But I said, if I were thinking about a lab, our mission is to help connect libraries and people with virtual reality. We provide students, faculty, patrons, and other libraries with flexible options for experimenting with virtual reality technology. We offer free access to equipment, which allows patrons to experiment with technology and develop products and services that aid in many fields. So you guys could take that and make it much better, I know. But think about what your mission is. What's your why? Why do you want to do this? Or why not? Why isn't it a good time for you? So what resources do you need? And I'm going to go through these in general, and then I'm going to go through each one in terms of the two labs that I interviewed to kind of give you an idea of what people actually did. So at this point, I'm going to ask you a lot of questions because these are questions you're going to have to ask yourself. But in terms of people are our greatest resource. One of the things I would say first off, especially if you don't know all the technology, which when I started I didn't, is to identify experts that are near you or labs that are near you that you can go and look at and get information from. Friends groups. Think about partnerships. What partnerships do you have available? What organizations are near you? In Montgomery, we have an organization called MGM Works, and I know there's a bunch of different works across the country, and they partner with community organizations to help with technology. So what options are available in your community that could be helpful? Also, if you're with an academic institution, what departments are available that would be interested in helping? Where are there experts in that department? Also, you can approach industry. I think Oculus in California gave out 1,000 headsets for free. So could you approach somebody in industry to get help? Also, there's student groups on campus. They're highly interested in this technology. Also, is it possible to get a grant from an organization? And also, some of this technology is cheap, so it's the fact that people will spend money on it because it's not going to cost you a lot. The most important thing too is to get buy-in from your administration. Sometimes, like I said, it's there already and they want to do this. Sometimes you're the person that's pushing for it. Also, for your staff, you want people who are technology focused or enjoy the technology. And are able to do training. They need training, but they need to be able to do training. So you've got to have people that can train your staff or train each other and have the ability to train patrons. Another thing, too, you could do is possibly have somebody on staff that you could appoint as a project manager. This is a huge project for some organizations. Or, on the other hand, it can be very simple. But you may need somebody to manage the project, form a committee of people, and then keep in mind, for a lot of people, this is going to be an added duty. It kind of fits in with their job description, but it's a little bit different, right? And we've done this over time. Librarians have had added duties, of course. So people are a most important factor. Also important, of course, is the money, right? What funding is available? Thank you, Colin, for clarifying on that. Thank you. So Colin says that the Virtual Boy is simply a stereoscopic display shoved into a headset. It's more similar to 3D TV movies than they are, as it offers no head tracking. So yeah, that was a great one too. Thank you, guys. So what funding's available? Do you have any money? Do you have a grant? Is that possible? You need to price out the equipment. Some of it's pretty cheap. Some of it can be quite expensive. The hardware and software and apps, what are they costing? Do you have the funds to, build a space? Will there be construction costs? Or, you can start small. You don't have to go big immediately and have a long-term plan for how you're going to grow your lab. But it's okay to start small. And some places have done that. Another thing you need to keep in mind is your space. So do you have an existing space that you can use for your lab? Can you repurpose an office? Can you repurpose a classroom? Or do you have to do new construction? So it's not just about that space, finding that space to begin with, but also, do you have enough space for the equipment? You have to have space between the equipment. You also, if you have virtual reality headsets that aren't ones where you're seated the whole time, you also need to plan for space, and I think it's a minimum of 6.5 feet by 5 feet, and if anybody knows exactly, please correct me, but you have to have that kind of space for those headsets where you walk around, and it has to be free of furniture and clutter, so you have to be very careful about this. Also, when you're thinking about your space, you need to think about power. That's very important. Is it adequate? Do you have enough drops? Do you have Wi-Fi? Do you have ventilation? These are things that we discovered as we were working on this project for my library. It was very hot once we got all the equipment and people in there. So that's something to think about. And then also, maybe you're not going to have a lab. Maybe you're going to have a mobile lab. So you need to make sure that you have space that you can have a storage for your equipment, whether you're having a mobile lab or a full-fledged lab that's permanent. So there's some space issues to think about. Okay, probably the hardest one, right? How do you figure out how much time this is going to take? And my advice, what we did is, and I'll talk a little bit more about this, is we had an end date in mind, which we had to kind of have a contingency plan because we weren't quite there yet. But you need time to train people. You need time to train your staff. You need time to practice that. You need time to set up the lab, especially if you're going to have to do any construction, if you're going to have to add more electricity, if you're going to have to look at ventilation. You need time to advertise your lab and get people excited about it. You also need time to set up meetings, maybe have a committee. So, identify your available time. You need to schedule kind of essential and high priority activities, and then schedule contingency time in case things don't work out. But, make a timeline, set a goal date, and then kind of work back from that would be my advice. So huge to the labs is the equipment. You need to do your research. There are several devices and headsets out there. Decide if you're interested in virtual reality or augmented reality, because they are kind of two different things, and what's going to work best for your lab. So do your research. One of the things that we did is we visited other labs. What hardware and software do you need? Again, this is where your experts in your community come into play. What apps are going to be good for your community? Also, are you going to need peripherals like gloves or keyboards or glasses? Are you going to need iPads? Are you going to require people to have a phone for this to work? Are you going to have a phone in place? Are you going to need storage? That comes into equipment cases and cords and peripherals like I talked about. So, like I said, you can obviously start small. You can borrow equipment and test it out and see if it's going to work for your lab. But again, this comes down to knowing your community and what they need. So just to give you a little bit of information about some of the technology that's out there. So there's headsets where are stationary, which again doesn't take up as much space. And those are things like the Google Cardboard, the Oculus Go. Oculus Go is about $200 now, I believe, which is not expensive. It's wireless. You just need to set it up, and you're good to go, and you can do pretty much everything within the headset. But then you've got things where you can actually walk around, like the Oculus Rift, which goes up a little bit in cost, which is about $400. And then you need to have a laptop or a PC, and it's wired. And so a lot of these laptops and PCs require great graphics quality and processing, and that costs a lot more money. Sometimes the laptop that you need for these devices costs significantly more than the cost of the device. So those are things to keep in mind. And then, kind of more high-end, kind of augmented reality is the HoloLens, which is about $3,500 to $4,000. So thinking about things in terms of cost and the equipment that you need. So the training. How are you going to do this? Is it going to be on the job? You kind of look up, videos on YouTube and you train yourself, you train your staff. How are you going to train patrons? Are you going to have written materials? Are you going to have videos? You need that time to train as well. So, are you going to have links to materials that are going to be helpful? Thinking about policies. You've got to have policies for safety in mind. Usage policies. Can children use the equipment? Can they check it out? Do you have a written agreement that you can share with people? One of the things I would say is look at what other libraries have done and borrow and see what fits for your community and your library. But there's things with safety that you need to think about. Also security. So what about security? So this is not just making sure the equipment doesn't disappear. There's things where there's database privacy risks. So things like movement and direction and location can be recorded by the device. Also, when we consume VR content, you can be targeted for marketing and different things like that. And also, sometimes an app can be compromised. So this is no different than what we're used to with computers. So you need to think about security, so privacy. So not just protecting and securing the equipment in your library, but also protecting the user and their data and their privacy. And being accountable for that. So also the physical safety. And then also protecting your equipment with a warranty or protection plan. Those are things to think about as well. So one of the things I can send you if you're interested is you can, there's actually a privacy policy generator, and I can send you the link for that if you'd like. But, when you're thinking about drafting these, oops, sorry, I moved ahead to maintenance. Sorry, I didn't mean to do that. So when you're thinking about these policies and security, think about putting it in simple language, what types of data you want to collect, and what's being collected, why this is being collected, how you're going to protect people, and then clear instructions on how to receive, destroy, or transfer user data. And you want to post this in an easy-to-see place. So just thinking about security. And both of my labs, I'll get to that, don't really address that so much, so it's something to think about for the future. Also important is maintenance. All this equipment requires constant maintenance to update it, so you need to think about who's going to do it. Are they skilled? Have they had training on how to do it? How often is it going to be done? Is it going to be as needed when somebody picks up the equipment, if you're checking it out, or are you going to have scheduled weekly maintenance? What needs to be updated? Is it the PC? Is it the headset? Is it the app? Also think about sanitizing. In our libraries we have so many people, and so many people get sick. So how are you going to sanitize and disinfect this device with cleaning, right? Also, I'm thinking about warranties and protection. Those and updates. Those all have to be maintained. And finally, how are you going to promote the lab? You've spent this money, little or big, and you want people to come to your library. So things you can think about is doing a press release, of course, using social media, Facebook, your website, Instagram, as you're building the lab, if it's a physical space, or as you're ordering equipment, taking pictures and promoting that and saying, coming soon to get people excited. You can also do direct marketing to community organizations or individuals. Personal contact is always great, through word of mouth. And think about when you want to do this. Like I said, sometimes an open house for people to look at the technology, flyers and posters. Sometimes you can do paid advertising on radios, television, the newspaper. We tend to shy away from that, because it does tend to cost a lot of money. We tend to go to social media and do that. And then also, when you're thinking about how you're going to promote these resources, think about and define your target audience and develop a profile of who you're trying to reach with this information. And that'll help drive what type of promotion you do. And then finally, I remember when I first started out, one of my library directors said, how are you going to assess this? How are you going to see that this works? And with a lot of things in libraries, it's really hard to measure, right? You just can't get an idea of whether or not this is progress. But what we talked about in the beginning, success might be just exposing people to this technology and having them get excited, being creative, making products and having ideas. That might be a measure of success. But in the beginning, as you're getting started, define your expectations. What is your definition of success? And I just told you probably what mine would be. What's the application of the lab? Those are questions you need to answer in the beginning with your planning. You can also, of course, take statistics. Sometimes the device will give you statistics, but they're not super great, I would say, because you can't really tell too much from them. But you can also measure through surveys. You can interview people after they've used the technology. Also do focus groups. You can interview your staff and ask them how things are going, and your patrons. Again, get statistics on usage, maybe not on the device, but people that come in. Look at interviews and observations. And also, the whole point of this is for people to get ideas. What ideas came out of this? What products did they make? Different things like that. Okay, so moving on to the two libraries that I interviewed, about SWFLN, which is, you guys love SWFLN, you know a lot about SWFLN, but in case you don't, I just wanted to give you a little bit of information about them. And then the other one is the library I worked for, which is Air University Library, so I'll get to that in a second. So, of course, SWFLN's been around since 1993, and so it's a multi-type library cooperative, and so it's where these libraries join together to provide services and training to people in Southwest Florida, which is fantastic. I've been blessed with being able to teach for you guys and also attend sessions. It's fantastic. So, it includes the Southwest Florida counties of Charlotte, Collier, DeSoto, Hendry, Lee, and Monroe. It's available to all library staff and volunteers throughout the state of Florida, so you don't just have to be in Southwest Florida. And of course, it's funded through federal and state grants, as well as membership dues and fees. So just to review, in case you didn't know everything that SWFLN had to offer, which is amazing, they've got all kinds of training, library staff day, networking, reciprocal borrowing, resource sharing. They've got scholarships. They do a lot of focus on patrons with disabilities, which is near and dear to my heart, STEAM support, and then they have a huge amount of items that they load, which is fantastic, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. So Air University Library is a little bit different. SWFLN is a multi-library cooperative. Air University Library is a Department of Defense library. It's the largest Department of Defense library, founded in 1946. So it's a special library, academic. It's focused on serving the military schools on Maxwell Air Force Base. So they are into warfighting and leadership and different things like that. More than 2.6 billion items. They have a branch library for the non-commissioned officers, and it's named after Fairchild, General Fairchild, who was one of the founders and first commanders of Air University. So they do things that typical libraries do. They have research guides, which are LibGuides. They also have special bibliographies going back. They produce a really special product called the Air University Library Index to Military Periodicals, which you should check out if you're ever looking for a military topic. It's just military magazines. Also, traditional reference service. We have over 100 subscription and free abstract databases, and also provide that to remote professional military education and graduate degrees. So, a little bit about the SWFLN lab. So if you wanted to get to it to borrow items, this is the URL here at the top. So when I talked about a lab, the definition of a lab in the beginning, SWFLN isn't a traditional lab. To me, it is a lab because what they do is they loan out the devices in kits, and it's called part of their Bits N Bytes to Borrow program. So as a SWFLN institutional member, you can borrow these kits, you can use it at your own library in your own programming without having to budget and purchase these new technologies. Because with VR, you're not sure what you want to do yet, right? You don't know for sure if you want a lab. So borrow the equipment from SWFLN, test it out, have a program in your library. So again, SWFLN institutional members can request it. Also, they do require some training on a couple of the devices like the Oculus Rift, so keep that in mind. But this is just a little bit of information about the SWFLN Bits N Bytes program. And it's not just the VR equipment. There's a ton of equipment that you can borrow. They don't offer training on each of the items listed, but you can, figure out how to do that. It's not too difficult. So it just walks you through what you can do to check out the items. And this is just a copy from their website, so you can take a look at that. So this is the LibGuide that I developed for the Air University Library Innovation Lab. So they have, it's a creative space, it's a fixed space, and I'll show you what it looks like later. They have, used to be an office where we had all of our copiers. It has glass walls. It has a variety of VR systems, peripherals and software, 3D printer and 3D modeling software, augmented reality devices, computer programming hardware, a mini hub, and a large glass board. And basically, whoever can get a library card. And so for us, it's the students and faculty and people that are on base that can get a library card and use this equipment. For health and safety reasons, they have to be, people under 18 years of age might face restrictions and require a parent or guardian, and then no one under 6 is allowed to use the equipment. And this has been used by many organizations on the Air Force Base. They've used it for AR and 3D printing research. They've also presented VR educational concepts to our leadership, created virtual classrooms for distant students, and they've also used it for team building and professional development sessions. Items do circulate, but it's on a case-by-case basis. So that's a little bit about the lab. So talking about purpose, and we talked about our why in the beginning. So when I interviewed both labs, I asked, hey, for SWFLN, why did you do this? What was beyond the idea to have a lab? And so with SWFLN, they're kind of cutting edge, right? So they were thinking about what's cool and what can we help further our libraries in the community? What could we do to help our libraries get these devices to people so they can be creative and have ideas for the future? And they felt the need for one because the world is moving into this arena, and also in Florida libraries, right? And it's a way to engage all patrons, especially our teens, right, with cool and relevant technology. It's also a way to connect with adults and, with experience. This is needed. These tools support learning, and it's the right thing to do in a very cool way. And so that's what happened with SWFLN. With Air University Library, they were working on updating the services to offer more contemporary offerings, because we're kind of like an academic library. So what else could we do to be creative and innovative? We looked at case studies from other libraries. We also researched into the subject of additive manufacturing, programming, and AR and VR concepts. And we wanted to create a centrally located multifunctional area where people could come and use the equipment without having to pay for and duplicate expensive equipment. So we felt the need because we needed to move beyond traditional library services. And this fits into the goals of our organization. Again, we wanted to have people be creative and develop things, especially for the Air Force. So when you're thinking about people, that's very important. In terms of SWFLN, they didn't really have a partner, but Bob Anstedt from Broward County, I'm sending a shout out to him if he gets tons of emails and calls after this. He was a very valuable resource for SWFLN, and he provided quick answers, and SWFLN was able to act and purchase things before the end of the year. And so it was the idea of SWFLN with support from their board. So with Air University Library, we actually partnered with a teaching and learning center, and they actually provide some of the hardware and software and peripherals that we use, and they're also available as an expert. But also we had people from different military schools, Colonel Tony Milliken from the E-School, which is an online graduate program, and also Dr. Anthony Gould from the Teaching and Learning Center. So those people were very important. We also had staff, of course. We formed a technology committee and started planning. So in terms of funding, how much did this cost both the labs, which is probably one of your main questions. So for SWFLN, it was just under $9,000. Things to think about with equipment, like I said before, storage devices, micro USB cables, the actual headsets, travel cases, a backup headset, great idea. Also maintenance plans and the software for the headsets. Also iPad covers and also merged goggles. So think about, in terms of funding, what this is going to cost. For the Air University Library, they spent just a little over $20,000. So kind of a little bit different funding level. And like I said before, you can start small. It doesn't have to be an all-out, full-funded, huge purchase. So, and the thing too, from SWFLN, acknowledging that it's not a lab, it's kind of they're adding as for the future as pieces become available and as they have money. So for the Air University Library, they have established a policy in the library that they'll fund new equipment and software purchases annually. So that's kind of a little bit different. Okay, in terms of space. So, in terms of space, like I said, SWFLN doesn't have a classroom or lab or anything, but they have mobile equipment that you can check out. And so this, you need to remember, if you do check out this equipment, when it comes to your library, you do need to have that space available for around the equipment, which is a little bit about like 5 feet, I believe. So think about that. So they store the equipment when it's not being used. Now, the Air University Library, like I said, is completely different. They have a fixed innovation lab. This is what it looks like. You can see all the equipment. They don't store the items in a cabinet or anything or have travel cases per se. Everything stays in the physical lab, although it can be checked out. And so this, keeps with not having to download everything or move it around all the time. Okay, so moving on. So how long did it take? For the SWFLN, it took about 2 to 3 months. They had to think about things, what components they wanted, and then they also had to, so they had pretty much had the components by the end of September, but they had to inventory, so that's an important thing, and also think about transportation and how to avoid damage. So they really started looking at this in December of 2018. The University Library, again, took 3 to 4 months, and we opened our lab in October of 2018. So again, these labs are relatively new. Equipment. So I'm going to run through the equipment quickly. But again, with SWFLN, they talked to Bob Anstedt, sorry if I'm saying that wrong, and he's presented on technology at Library Staff Day. He's very easy to connect with, and so they're able to get kind of an idea of what equipment might fit best for the, the Florida Southwest Library community, things that might work. So with Air University Library, they looked at a bunch of models and different equipment. Again, we talked to people in our community, at the colleges, and again, this is a way, for people not to have to duplicate or spend money on this equipment and still be able to try it out and be innovative and creative. So for SWFLN, I just wanted to show you, this is all the available things that you can check out, which is fantastic. But keep in mind, you do need to have a computer, laptop that goes with some of the devices, and also the iPad mobile lab needs to go with some of the devices. So they've got, again, the Oculus devices. They've got the Merge Cube, which is kind of cool and different. They've also got the they've got one HoloLens that you can check out. So this is just a run through of everything that they have. Air University Library, run through of what they have. They've got Oculus devices, one HoloLens, a Samsung Odyssey. We've also got a 3D printer and a Raspberry Pi. So again, think about, do you just want virtual reality or do you want to have a mixed reality lab? So training, what do? We're getting close to the end here, so I want to make sure I get it through everything. So for training, SWFLN created some documents. This is one of their CE assistants, Richard, created this hands-on virtual reality PowerPoint for training. And then they've also got an Oculus Rift bootcamp that they want you to do before you check out that equipment. Air University Library, on their LibGuide, research guide, they link to all the different devices and have user guides for those. They also have staff that can come in and train and help you with that. So for policies, this is directly from SWFLN's website, and you can take a look at that if you want. But once you click on a piece of equipment, it tells you a little bit about the equipment. It tells you some of the policies that are in place, and you fill out a form. It tells you a little bit about who has access. It tells you a little bit about what you can borrow for informational purposes only. And then once you fill out the form, of course, they want you to be sure to be careful with the equipment, basic things like that. And then when you reserve the equipment, you get a nice email that tells you when you can come and pick it up, and it's fantastic. So Air University Library has a multi document. It's the military. They've got their instructions. Military instructions is what we call them. And so it works through things like who can use the lab, which we talked a little bit about, when it's open. Also, things with the military that are a little bit different is the Air Force may have rights of ownership to the inventions made by people in this lab. Talks a little bit about health and safety. And so this is available for you to look at if you'd like. But again, look at the policies other people have done, and it'll give you clues about how to proceed with your own policies. Security. There was not a lot about security. SWFLN does have some instructions regarding passwords and making sure people from multiple locations can't get on the devices and get in and kind of hack in. But I think this is an unexplored area. People, of course, are securing their equipment, but they also need to think about privacy and things like that. And so I think that's going to be coming, but something I don't want you to forget about. Okay, so kind of wrapping up. So maintenance, who does the maintenance? How much time does it take? So for SWFLN, the new continuing education coordinator will probably look at things weekly, but for right now they are just kind of looking at it and updating it before people check the devices out. For Air University Library, they have ongoing maintenance. They have to clean the 3D printer. Sometimes they troubleshoot errors and compatibility issues. They have to set up new and existing equipment and software. Their lab is maintained by a staffer for 2 hours a day and open other times by appointment. So that's kind of how they do their maintenance and things like that. Promotion. So for SWFLN, it's on the website, and I'll show you what that looks like. Right here, you can click on the Bits and Bytes to borrow to request equipment. So right now, it's word of mouth, but if you look up here in the top, you see Adobe Spark, so expect that to be coming to kind of promote the lab that they have. For Air University Library, they did an open house, did a press release, and then they had an invitation for an open house. So kind of two completely different communities and approaches to kind of promoting it. Of course, Facebook and different things like that we did as well. So how are you going to assess this? So for SWFLN, they did have checked things out. The Oculus Rift has circulated 5 times, the Oculus Go 3 times, and the HoloLens Kit 2 times, which is fantastic since last last December. I think that's a great show of use of equipment. And it's hard to measure these statistics. So if anybody figures out a way to do that, please let me know. For the Area University Libraries, since last October, they've circulated and had attendance 364 people. They've changed to more of an open door policy, so those statistics might change a little bit. But again, what's your definition of success? And then just real quickly before we close, I wanted to talk about obstacles and feedback and the future. So it'll take me just maybe 2 minutes. So for SWFLN, some of the obstacles we're thinking about, making sure about safety. It's one of the things they really wanted to stress, especially also legal issues and concerns to children using VR, people becoming motion sick or hurting themselves while using VR. So think about safeguards and supervision for people who don't have a lot of experience with VR. Again, thinking about disinfecting, how are you going to do that safely? Also technical problems, a hub USB hub that can incompatible with Oculus Rift, things just don't work, right? So think about how you're going to solve that technical know-how, and things like that. Also cost, a big thing, can be a big obstacle. Like I said before, the headsets can be relatively cheap, but sometimes you need a $1,000 computer that's capable of running the graphics and the refresh rate that's needed for the equipment. So for Area University Library, one of the things that they encountered is that on several occasions customers voiced skepticism, and I'm sure that you're going to get this if you have a lab. Why bother? Sometimes they think it's complex and unapproachable, or a technology for technology's sake gimmick, and so there's often some resistance. So you may encounter this. Often this comes from a place of ignorance, since people have never used a lab or the components they're dismissing, and they're quickly converted when they try the equipment for the first time. It inevitably produces an aha moment for people who have no experience. So running a quick demo or tutorial, say, hey, let me just have you try this, especially if you're trying to get buy-in from your administration. So people see how they can make connections with this technology for their own classroom or research. Also headaches, graphics. Be careful about running very graphics-heavy program. When it's not in use, make sure you turn it off. Also, sometimes the software has to be downloaded. It's not quick. Also, sometimes items break. So, make sure people have training and make sure you supervise them. So some of the feedback. The most frequent feedback from SWFLN is how the kits are intense, the sense that you're fully immersed in what's happening. Everyone seems to say wow when they're wearing the headset. Something even as mundane as Google Earth becomes fantastic. One of the things they would say as far as feedback is have a backup headset, in case things go wrong, so that you can have a quick fix if things go wrong. So that way too, for your libraries, for SWFLN, you're going to ensure that their programming is a success, and their success is SWFLN's success. So for Area University Library, again, the aha moment, the ideas and concepts and research demonstrating that to others is highly engaging, and having multiple devices and software allows people to bridge technology and put several different things together to have ideas. And also you can demonstrate that educational concepts and ideas are possible with this equipment. So the future, last thing. 3 minutes over. So I asked SWFLN if they had any plans to expand it in the future, and SWFLN said, we never really have plans, in quotes, for these types of toys. We go with the flow and get what is requested when we have funds. If we have more funds, we add them as we needed, based on popularity. Again, SWFLN knows its audience. It knows its libraries. It knows its community. So it buys things according to what you need and your programming and what's going to be best for you. And they can justify it because things are being checked out. People are using it. People in your communities are getting ideas and getting excited about the technology that's coming. Also, for Area University Library, there are plans to expand it in the future. They also have a dedicated virtual reality classroom in collaboration with other partners. And it'll continue to develop and acquire as new materials become available. So I have some additional resources. One thing I would point out to you that's one of the best things is to look at the SWFLN past webinars. There's a ton on technology and makerspaces, so if you're not familiar with what equipment you would like, that's one way to get to the experts on it. But these are just, like I said, some sites that would be helpful for you through the government, some places to go to find equipment. There are places to get ideas about trends, and all this is documented, so it's just really a quick read. You can go to the LibGuides community, and do a search. There are a ton of guides on virtual reality labs that have been set up. Also, American Libraries. There's also a really great guide on getting set up and getting started in virtual reality that's fantastic. So real quickly, I'm just going to finish up. Like I said, SWFLN recorded webinars are fantastic. That link was there. TED Talks. There's also some courses on training, free books. Got some free articles. And all this is documented for you. So I just wanted to make sure that I had enough time to go over everything that was important to setting up a lab. And then this is supplemental, just kind of a bonus for you. And so if anybody has any questions, I know I'm exactly 5 minutes over. I always do this because I always want to give you everything I can possibly give you for an hour so you can get started on what you need. But are there any questions? I know we went through a lot, and I appreciate you taking an hour out of your day to spend it with me to look at labs. I think there's a great deal of resistance on kind of implementing this technology, but there doesn't have to be because it's coming, it's going to be in our communities, and libraries are a fantastic point for bridging that gap for people who don't have access. Oh, the websites, Maria, for which ones? For all the bonus material? Additional resources? All that's going to be in the PowerPoint and the recording that you get. Yeah, that'll all be, you will get the entire PowerPoint from Leanne when they've done the recording, or you can contact me directly, and that's my email, and I can send it to you as well. And I see there's one more comment in here. Let me scroll up a little bit, sorry. A little bit slow here. Let me see what the comment question was. Colin says, learning about hardware as well as the nuts and bolts of policy, security, and maintenance is great, but what kind of experiences and software are being successfully deployed in these spaces programs? Are people coming back time and time again, or are these generally programs that they experience and then move on? Furthermore, are these being used strictly experientially by the customers, or are they being used as creation tools? Are the customers developing the platforms, and if so, what kind of support and staff are being asked to provide? Okay, let me answer your first question. So people are coming back to these labs, definitely. So it's not just a one-off. Of course, people are just getting started in this realm, so there are definitely the one-time visits, and oh, that's cool. But we have people that come back repeatedly and work on projects, people from the military schools. And I know that SWFLN had the technology checked out a couple of times, but we're just getting started. So I think that's going to come as people get more familiar with the technology and understand it and what it can do, and not just the cool factor. That's one of the things that, you know, when you're looking at defining your success, is this, what's your plan? Is it just for awareness, or do you specifically want to have, say, military applications of the technology? What's your definition of success? And so right now we're kind of starting small. And then your other question was, yeah, so there are a few people that are using it as creation tools, of course. And then I don't know if they're developing their platforms or not. I have not seen that, if they're developing apps. But I do know that one of the people, remember we mentioned that we partnered with MGM Works, which is downtown in Alabama, in Montgomery. And they have like a Shark Tank for virtual reality apps. And so someone developed a way to have a calendar for pilots to help them sleep. So it's a virtual reality app. So I know that things are coming. I'm just not aware of anything at our lab that's been done yet. And then, so staff, staff, of course, provide. For us, it's a little bit more intense. There's a little bit more sophisticated devices, and so they are asked to provide training. But a lot of the people that come in know the system, know what they're doing. They've had experience with it. So we have varying levels of experience. So hopefully that answers a lot of your questions, Colin.
Okay,
If
great.
not, let me
Thank you,
know.
Stephanie, for an informative webinar. Attendees, we encourage you to keep an eye on the SWFLN CE calendar, SWFLN Facebook page, or your messages from the listserv for more webinars. Thank you, everyone, for attending, and have a terrific rest of your day.
Thank you so much, Leanne. Thank you, Deb.